breaking news today.
Please subscribe and check notification box to get all breaking news alerts.
If there's one thing we learned about the presidential election last year, it's that liberals will do whatever it takes to win. We constantly heard incidents of voter fraud taking place, where Hillary's minions were voting multiple times, and buses of people were being transported into key swing state counties in order to throw the vote. Last night Doug Jones defeated Republican Roy Moore in the Alabama Senate race, where liberals are disgustingly throwing the win back in our faces this morning, calling the victory a stinging snub to President Trump. But unfortunately for liberals, Jones' win is being immediately overshadowed by the shady tactics they used to win, after several disturbing reports are surfacing about what was really going on at the polls last night. 1. Fake narrative about voter suppression. It was widely predicted that blacks in Alabama would determine the outcome of the race. When the liberal media began to realize that it would be an incredibly tight race, where we saw Moore and Jones separated by less than 1% for several hours, liberals immediately began to push the false narrative that blacks were being blocked from the polling places. One of the trending stories was from fake liberal website Verified Politics was a viral story called "Something Incredibly Shady is Happening in Alabama Right Now," where they made the ridiculous claim that blacks were being prevented from voting. In the article, the website asserted that white supremacy was preventing black citizens from being able to take to the polls. That no doubt got the black populace fired up just in time to go cast their votes for Jones before the race ended. Here's a short excerpt of the ridiculous story, where they claim that white supremacists were requiring poor blacks from being able to vote because they were required to show an ID. Alabama has a long history of suppressing the vote dating back at least to 1901, when the state passed a new constitution whose main purpose was to deny African Americans the right to vote, they whined. In 2011, the Republican-controlled state legislature passed a law that all voters must have a photo ID, which immediately disenfranchised many rural and poor blacks. 2. Liberals' army of felons. Liberals frequently use the backing of criminals to bolster their agenda, which is why they fight so hard to keep Muslim immigrants and Mexican illegals in our country. The Alabama Senate race was no different, as Breitbart exposed how George Soros and infamous race baiter Al Sharpton had their grubby talons all over this race right from the beginning, where the duo registered an army of convicted felons across Alabama to help bolster support for Jones. An organization partnered with the George Soros-financed group and led by a radical leftist who is the half-brother of the infamous controversial Reverend Al Sharpton has been diligently working over the past few weeks to register convicted felons across Alabama, Breitbart began. They went on. The aim of the effort has been to get as many felons as possible on the roster before last Monday, the deadline to register in order to vote in Alabama's December 12 Senate special election that pits Republican Roy Moore against Democratic challenger Doug Jones. The man spearheading the campaign has stated outright that his effort is meant to ensure a Democratic victory in Alabama. The thousands of felons reportedly newly registered over the past few weeks were most likely not included in any recent polling on the Alabama Senate race put out by major firms. Jones himself is tied to some of the specific organizations associated with the drive to register felons here. Indeed, as Breitbart News first reported, Jones spearheaded a project for a massively Soros-financed legal activist group demanding full voting rights be given to felons released from prison, including those convicted of murder, rape and other violent crimes. 3. Dark money from very questionable sources. Whenever you smell a rat, chances are George Soros is somewhere nearby lurking about. The infamous evil billionaire, who turned his own neighbors into the Nazis in the 1940s, is constantly gunning for the destruction of America, where he's a huge donor of crooked politicians like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and rhino Republicans like John McCain. So it should come as no surprise that Soros yet again was at the helm causing chaos and trying to throw the election in Alabama. Via Breitbart. Politico reported on Monday that the George Soros-funded Priorities USA Action and Senator Chuck Schumer's The NY Senate Majority PAC are the dark money behind the Alabama shell group that has spent more than $4.1 million to defeat conservative Republican Roy Moore in Tuesday's Alabama U.S. Senate special election, in which he faces liberal Democrat Doug Jones. 4. Liberals behind the character assassination of Roy Moore. For weeks, there was an ongoing barrage of accusations made about Roy Moore, where he was even accused of pedophilia and going after several underage girls. One of Moore's accusers was Beverly Young Nelson, the ex-waitress who charged that Moore groped her when she was 16 and he was in his 30s, and used her high school yearbook bearing Moore's signature as proof that she knew him. Even though Nelson would be busted for plagiarizing the yearbook entry, liberals still used the woman's false testimony as a way to push the narrative that Moore was a sexual predator. There still has yet to be any evidence against Moore except the testimonies of these women, who conveniently crawled out of the woodwork to share their stories right before the race. It was even discovered that George Soros was behind the hit research of Moore, and was encouraging these women to speak out against the Republican judge. It's pretty disturbing how liberals will not stop in their conquest to destroy this country with their shady and illegal antics, and yesterday was an enormous hit to the Republican Party. Jones' victory will have significant consequences for Republicans on the national level, where Democrats are now working towards capturing the last Senate seat up for grabs next year in order to gain the majority in the Senate.